let's watch a couple of video clips that sort of summarizing what I just said, okay?
And about 4,400 years ago, the entire world was deluged by Noah's flood, and the dinosaurs, along with billions of other creatures, were wiped out. Let's take a quick look at some evidences that show that the biblical account might actually be true. First, dinosaurs are cleverly designed. Consider this Triceratops. Its 2,000-pound head is mounted in a way that allows it to turn every which way, yet still be strong enough to ram something, even while running. What about massive sauropods with weight-bearing systems from hip to toe that allow its 200,000-pound body to even walk, and neck vertebrae that are 90% filled with air so it can lift up its head? Next, there's the absence of dinosaur ancestors and transitions. Even the Chicago Field Museum sign admits there have been 0 transitions between dinosaur kinds. It shows question marks regarding where they came from. It's almost like someone just put each basic kind on Earth right at the same time. There are even dinosaur design features that show they lived in the ideal pre-flood world. Pterodactyls may have been too heavy to fly in today's atmosphere. Same with huge pre-flood dragonflies. The fossil record is filled with giant creatures and plants. We know this because there are billions of dead things buried in rock layers laid down by water all over the Earth. And when we look at the dinosaur fossil record, we see that they were buried furiously, rapidly, and simultaneously, oftentimes found fleeing in groups. Take this massive bone bed in Hilda, Canada. Thousands of centrosaurs were catastrophically buried over an entire square mile. Or this one in China, where thousands of different kinds of dinosaurs were simultaneously buried in a single 980-foot-long ravine. There are hundreds of dinosaur bone beds all over the world, including the U.S., where the Morrison Formation covers 13 states and 700,000 square miles. Thousands of torn-apart dinosaurs are buried here in hundreds of mass graves, with many found in the classic death pose with their necks arched back, choking as they died. Museum signs everywhere even admit they died in a watery catastrophe. Some dinosaurs are even found mummified, with tree leaves, flowers, ferns, shrubs, and algae still in their stomach. Dinosaurs are even found buried with marine creatures. Isn't a global flood the best explanation for this? Scientists have been discovering soft tissue in dinosaur bones. They describe blood cells, blood vessels, connective tissue, and even collagen, which has a maximum shelf life of about 900,000 years at 40 degrees. With a maximum shelf life of less than 1 million years, what's collagen doing in dinosaur bones that are supposedly 65 million years old? Many dinosaur bones are even found unfossilized in places like Madagascar, Alaska, and Montana. Does this evidence seem to support the Bible's recent and violent flood, or evolution stories? But some would say if the Bible includes the truth about Earth history, it would specifically mention dinosaurs. Well, the term dinosaur wasn't even invented until 1841, and Bible translations before this time used the term dragon over 35 times, in many contexts describing dinosaur-like creatures. Job chapter 40 describes a majestic creature using the name behemoth, which means colossal beast. In context, Job and his philosopher friends just finished over 30 chapters of dialogue trying to explain God and why he would allow such hardships into Job's life. Then God shows up in a whirlwind, tells Job to brace himself like a man, and says that he would be the one asking Job the questions for a while. Then, for 4 chapters straight, God asks Job 77 rhetorical questions that all have to do with creation. After explaining to Job that he is the master designer of space and earth, God describes 13 of his created animals, such as an ostrich, horse, and deer, then caps off the discussion by telling Job about his 2 grandest creations, Behemoth and Leviathan. God calls Behemoth the first of all his ways, meaning the first in rank, the chief, the most supreme of his creative works. In context, God is saying to Job, sit down, brace yourself, and now I will tell you of the chief of all my works, the biggest, most amazing land creature I ever made. When we scan through all land-dwelling creatures, both living and extinct, which one comes up as the first in rank, the most colossal, or the chief? Clearly the sauropod dinosaur. Pairing God's word that Behemoth is the grandest creature he ever made with the fact that sauropods are the largest land creatures we've ever found should give us a clue to Behemoth's identity. Sauropods were huge. The largest one found to date was over 120 feet long. That's 10 freeway lanes across. At a weight of 76 tons, it's a wonder these creatures could even walk. In fact, Dr. Waddell was granted an international award for discovering one of the secrets behind how their mobility was even possible. Their bones were pneumatic. They were charged with air. Dr. Waddell notes they were marvels of biological engineering, and that efficiency of design is especially evident in their vertebrae, the bones that make up the backbone. It turns out their vertebrae was increasingly lighter, higher up the spinal column, and were filled with air, some up to 90%.
When Matt puts sauropod backbones through a CT scanner, he finds a real surprise. The X-ray slices from the CT scans reveal not marrow, but a honeycomb pattern inside the dinosaur's back and neck bones, filled only with air. Matt's work shows that the bigger dinosaurs got, the more air they had in their vertebrae.
This is one neck vertebra from Supersaurus.
A neck bone like this would have been light enough for one man to lift. The same size mammal bone would require a forklift.
Now, we found that the biggest of these sauropods, the vertebrae were about 90% air. So that's comparable to styrofoam.
So the bigger the dinosaurs got, the more air sac-like structures running into the bone.
Absolutely.
While this may solve the puzzle of how they could lift and move their massive heads and necks, it doesn't solve the challenge of how they could possibly inhale enough oxygen through their tiny nostrils, which were only about twice the size of those on a living horse. Perhaps they thrived better in a world before Noah's flood when the oxygen levels were likely higher. Their long necks and tails resembled living suspension bridges. For this creature to eat, breathe, and move its long neck, the series of over 12 neck vertebrae had to be interlocking and twistable. They also had to have anchoring points in just the right places for muscles and ligaments to connect in such a way to prevent the neck from pinching veins and nerves and to brace the trachea and esophagus. God even describes Behemoth's diet, eating grass like an ox. In 2005, researchers found grass and sauropod coprolites in India, and some paleobotanists are even saying that this will cause a rewrite in our understanding of dinosaur evolution, because evolution holds that grass didn't evolve until millions of years after the dinosaurs had gone extinct. God describes Behemoth's strength in his hips and power in his stomach muscles. Again, we have a strong clue that Behemoth was a sauropod dinosaur because, while many animals have strong hips and stomach muscles, none were as strong as the sauropod. The muscle structure around the hips and stomach that were necessary for sauropods to move, walk, turn, and eat would be incredible. In fact, for some sauropods, like the Diplodocus, its highest point of its core body was the hips, and its whole body balanced on the hips, front to back. Diplodocus was able to rear up on its back legs and balance on its tail like a tripod, making use of the hips to support not just the back half of its body, but the front half too. This required enormous strength in the hip and stomach muscles, considering they lifted tons of its own body into the air. Below the hips was an incredible weight distribution system that went from a massive femur, which in some cases was about 8 feet long, to 2 shin bones, then to 5 toes. Behemoth's tail also closely matches those of sauropods. God describes that he moves his tail like a cedar tree, and follows this by stating the sinews of his thighs are tightly knit. Paleontologists have learned from muscle attachment locations in their bones that the tightly knit structure of Behemoth's thighs and hips actually made his tail sway from side to side with each step, much as a cedar tree does when it sways in the wind. Tail drag marks are only rarely found behind sauropod footprints, indicating their tails were raised while they walked. It's difficult to think of a creature that fits this biblical description better than a sauropod dinosaur. God describes his bones like beams of bronze. Most Bible versions translate this phrase as tubes of bronze, conduits of bronze, or pipes of brass, which conveys both strength and being hollow like a channel or a tube. This matches the fact that sauropods had the largest leg bones of any animal, and they are in fact just like tubes of metal, having a hard outer casing and spongy marrow and veins on the inside. Then God says that its ribs are like bars of iron. Unlike much of sauropod's skeleton that was spongy and filled with air for weight savings, its ribs were fully ossified. They were made out of solid bone. Again, we have a perfect match. God even describes Behemoth's habitat. He lies under the lotus trees, in a covert of reeds and marsh. The lotus trees cover him with their shade, and the willows by the brook surround him. This was a creature that had to be near lots of green food, living in a lush, tropical environment.
This is really amazing, isn't it? So,
Looking at this thing, thinking,
there's another one.
this is really interesting.
It was the inside of the T-Rex bone that fascinated Schweitzer, who made thin sections out of it. And in these cross-sections of fossilized bone, she saw something that she and everyone else had thought was impossible. Round structures that looked like red blood cells. Dinosaur blood cells.
inside those channels where the blood vessels would have run were these little round red structures that were all kind of lined up like a train, and they were bright red and translucent. Nobody else had seen anything like that before.
The very idea of blood cells in a 70 million year old bone was more than unconventional. It was radical.
Nobody was imagining that dinosaurs might have had preserved soft tissues.
Derek Briggs is curator of invertebrate paleontology at the Peabody Museum at Yale University. So along comes Mary Schweitzer, and she's starting to look inside dinosaur bones and has made this startling discovery about the presence of red blood cells. What was your initial reaction to that?
Oh, I think the same reaction as everybody's, that this was totally improbable. She'd perhaps misinterpreted the evidence or was exaggerating the potential for what she was seeing.
So skeptical at first.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Why do you think it didn't occur to anybody?
Because we have this clear understanding that part of all biological cycles involves decay. I mean, nature is set up to break down that material and recycle it. So it's just improbable that those kinds of very delicate structures would survive, particularly for millions of years.
When you think about it, the laws of chemistry and biology and everything else that we know say that it should be gone. It should be degraded completely. This is not possible. Do it again. We got another piece of bone. We put it in the solution. We waited 2 or 3 or 4 weeks. Looked again, more blood vessels. We must have repeated that with probably 17 or 18 different fragments of bone.
Isn't this amazing? So actually, I had a chance to meet a scientist working on topics relating to these dinosaurs bones. And a few years ago, I attended a conference to give a talk at a conference, and one of the speakers at the conference was actually one of the scientists involved with the research on the dinosaur bones. And during his presentation, he said that they found these massive T-Rex thigh bones, and because they were so big, they had to call a helicopter. And somehow the helicopter that came was a bit too small to carry the T-Rex thigh bone, so they had to cut it. They had to cut the bone. So that's why they happened to examine the details of the bones and found those soft tissues and blood vessels. But this scientist who made this presentation at the conference insisted that the blood vessel-like microstructures must be a remnant of passing minerals and so on, and it couldn't be like that, denying that those are blood vessels, since it would not be possible that those blood vessels are preserved through 65 million years or 70 million years. But now we know that he was wrong, because it is now well known that the blood vessels are real, and the tissues from the T-Rex thigh bones can be stretched and returns to its original form, as they have been well reported, not only in this paper, but also in many pieces of other literatures. So if you fix the 65 million years, if you fix onto, or if you are fixated onto 65 million years, you get a totally different interpretation of the same data. Okay. Okay. So this is our last slide today. So if you remove the evolutionary framework, so just remove the prejudice, get rid of the millions of years from your mind, just see the data in their face value, and then take the Bible seriously. You will find an explanation that matches perfectly, and it'll make perfect sense. So if you take the assumptions based on biblical creation, biblical history, you can obtain the creationist conclusions using the same data that the evolutionists use. Same data, same method, same scientific method. At the end of the day, it is a matter of assumptions. It is a matter of world views. Which one will you choose? I will take the biblical worldview. Thank you.